Their entire profession was being shot at. Target Squadron 9 were the fleet's designated prey, 11 towcraft and their crews, based out of the gunnery ranges at Selwyn Roads. They towed the great target sledges, the battleships hammered at extreme range. They flew the threat profiles, drone swarms, simulated torpedo runs, mock cruiser passes that every point defense crew in the Navy qualified against. And they operated the ghost rigs, the signature augmentation arrays that could dress a 40-ton drone in the electronic clothing of a heavy cruiser so convincingly that fire control systems, and occasionally admirals, had to be reminded which contacts were costume. Every marksmanship trophy in the human fleet, every battle efficiency pennant flown from every turret in the service was earned by shooting at them. Target Squadron 9 wanted this remembered. The fleet called them the Clay Pigeons and had long since stopped meaning it unkindly because the pigeons had made an art of the only tactical problem nobody else practiced daily, what it is like to be the target. 20 years of professional experience of being tracked, locked, ranged, and fired upon had made them the service's quiet authorities on how weapons hunt, how sensors deceive themselves, how a firing solution feels from the wrong end. And, above all, how to be missed, their towcraft being required, by trade to survive at the edge of every barrage the fleet could throw. Their commander was R.V. Stone, 19 years a pigeon, a pilot whose service record listed, under combat experience, none. And under special qualifications, a line that had begun as a clerk's joke and become the squadron's collected pride, has been fired upon, without malice, more than any officer in the history of the service. Estimated ordnance expended at subject to date, 1 fleet's worth. Then the war came to the Selwyn sector, and the joke stopped being one. Because the Malec were coming, and the Malec's way of war opened always with 1 fleet's worth of ordnance expended in a single hour at whatever they believed to be the enemy. The pigeons' whole careers, it turned out, had been a rehearsal. The Malec called their doctrine the First Rain, and in 3 campaigns no fleet had survived its arithmetic. They were a power built on industrial mass, torpedo carriers by the score, magazines beyond any rivals, and a strategic principle of brutal clarity: spend munitions, not crews. A Malec campaign began with the Rain, a saturation strike of thousands of torpedoes launched from beyond effective reply against the enemy's assembled fleet, timed for the moment of maximum concentration. Fleets disperse or die, and dispersed fleets lose campaigns anyway. Twice, human intelligence had watched neighbor species navies take the Rain at anchor and cease to exist as institutions. Now the Malec were coming for the Selwyn marches, and the fleet's dilemma was the Rain's whole design. The counter-offensive that could stop them required concentration. 41 capital ships assembling at Selwyn Roads with their trains and escorts, a fleet that would take 11 days to gather and could not fight scattered. Intelligence was unequivocal. Malec scouts were already sampling the approaches. The Rain would fall on the assembly at its fattest. Between day 8 and day 11, projected torpedo count 4,000, projected fleet survival. The staff paper declined to print a figure and printed instead a recommendation to disperse, which was a recommendation to concede the marches. The conference at Selwyn Fleet Headquarters had been running for 6 hours when Commander R.V. Stone, present because Target Services Logistics appeared as item 14 on the agenda, asked permission to address items 1 through 13. The room, out of options, granted it, and the transcript preserves the pitch that founded a branch of warfare. "Your problem," Stone said, "is that 4,000 torpedoes are coming, and something has to be standing where the fleet is supposed to be when they arrive. You cannot make the fleet survive the Rain. But the Rain has never fallen on us before, and I submit, respectfully, that nobody in this galaxy knows how to stand in front of ordnance like the people who have done it for 20 years, professionally, without dying once. Assemble your fleet somewhere dark. Give my squadron the roads, the ghost rigs, and 3 weeks." "You want to build a fleet of targets," said the Admiral. "Sir," said Stone with the whole dignity of his service. "I want to build the finest fleet of targets ever assembled. And then I want the enemy to shoot it, which is the one thing we can absolutely guarantee they will do, because we are very, very good at being worth shooting." The Phantom fleet of Selwyn Rhodes was built in 19 days, and the building of it consumed every ghost rig in the service, every drone the Rangers owned, and every hour of 20 years of accumulated professional understanding of how sensors are fooled. Because this deception would face not a gunnery class, but a war. The bones were the target inventory, sledges and drones, re-engined, formation programmed, anchored across the roads in the exact dispersal plan the real assembly would have used. The flesh was signature, ghost rigs dressing each drone in a specific ship's electronic identity, hull return, reactor harmonic, drive spectrum, and here the Pigeon's strange intimacy with the fleet paid its dividend. Because the squadron had towed targets for these very ships for 2 decades and knew them not as classes but as individuals. They knew the battleship Resolute's reactor ran 2 harmonics proud since her refit. The rigs sang it. They knew the carrier Ostrova's launch bay doors leaked thermal on the port side. The rigs leaked it. Stone's riggers, under Chief Opal Mercer, tuned each Phantom by ear and by memory, arguing personality with the fervor of portraitists. The adamant does not hold station that neatly. Give her the wonder. Nobody who has ever towed for the Vigilant would believe her comms this quiet. Someone write her gunnery department some arguments. Because the fleet is not hulls, the fleet is behavior. The Phantom assembly lived. It drilled daily, drone formations, flying the working-up exercises of a fleet, preparing an offensive, sloppily at first and then better, as real fleets improve. It transmitted 3 weeks of manufactured traffic, supply manifests, personnel squabbles, a fictional inspection by a fictional admiral that generated 400 authentic-sounding complaints. It received genuine supply runs, freighters docking at drones dressed as tenders, crews playing their parts under sealed orders they mostly guessed the shape of. And 11 light hours away, in the cold of the Barrens dust bank, the real fleet assembled in absolute silence, engines banked, receiving the Rhodes Theatre on tight beam, and, per 3 separate captain's logs, becoming quietly obsessed with their own impersonations. The Vigilant's actual gunnery department formally protested their Phantom's manufactured arguments as insufficiently vigorous. Stone's riggers, delighted, escalated the Phantom's arguments. The protest was withdrawn with compliments. Malec scouts sampled the approaches on schedule, day 6, day 9, day 10, and their long-range take went home to a Doctrine that had never once needed to doubt what its sensors showed it: the human fleet, 41 capitals, assembling at Selwyn Rhodes, fat, concentrated, and 11 days from readiness. The rain was loosed on day 11. The argument about who would be inside the deception when the rain fell was the operation's one real fight, and it was fought between the Pigeons and their own admiralty in writing for a week. The staff position was reasonable, which made it dangerous. The Phantom fleet was machinery. Machinery could be conducted remotely. There was no operational requirement for 140 human beings to hold station inside the impact zone of 4,000 torpedoes, and every requirement of conscience against it. The drones would die alone, as drones do, and the riggers would play their deaths from a safe light minute out. Stone's reply, 4 paragraphs, is in the Decoy Service's founding archive, and its heart is the paragraph the branch reads aloud at every commissioning. "A light minute is a minute," he wrote, "and the rain assesses in seconds. Malec terminal sensors judge each kill and reallocate the pack's remainder in real time. A Phantom that dies 1 second wrong, 1 debris bloom light, 1 distress call late, teaches the whole strike it is killing costumes, and the strike carries enough reserve to then find the Barrens, and the fleet, and the campaign. Remote conduction cannot close that second. The lag is physics. Hands can close it. My people have spent 20 years learning the exact width of a barrage's edge, and I am telling you professionally, this show cannot be phoned in. The Pigeons fly inside, or the deception is a coin flip, and the fleet does not spend 41 capital ships on coin flips. "We are not volunteering to be brave, Admiral. We are refusing to do bad work." The Admiralty yielded, with conditions the squadron accepted and one it refused. The offer of volunteer relief crews from the fleet declined by every pigeon aboard. On the grounds, Mercer's endorsement noted that "you do not hand a stranger the towline in weather." On the last night, Stone assembled the squadron in the range hangar at Selwyn, beneath 20 years of shot-up Target sledges hung from the rafters like trophies, and gave the shortest pre-battle address in the fleet's records, 11 words now welded onto the hangar's lintel. "Tomorrow we are the fleet. Fly like they are watching." They are. 4,090 torpedoes crossed into the Selwyn roads in the war's largest single act of expenditure, a wavefront of drives that sensor operators across the sector lobbed as weather, and Target Squadron 9 11 2 craft and 140 souls stood into it. This was the part no drone could do, and the reason the Pigeons had insisted, over the Admiralty's every objection, on flying inside their own deception. A saturation strike is not a bludgeon. It is a conversation. Malec torpedoes hunted in packs, compared notes, re-attacked cripples, and, above all, assessed. Their terminal sensors judged each target's death before expending follow-up weapons on it. And a fleet of phantoms that died wrong, too clean, too quiet, too cheap, would tell the Rain's assessors mid-strike that they were killing costumes. The deception had to be flown, ship by phantom ship, death by convincing death, from inside the storm. The Pigeons flew it, as they had flown 20 years of ranges, towcraft weaving through the torpedo storm at the edges of lethality, conducting their charges' final performances. Phantom cruisers took their hits behind staged secondary explosions, debris canisters, tuned to each ship's actual construction, blooming hull-true wreckage, drone battleships burned with chemical fires, stocked to match human atmospheres, venting theatrical crews' worth of air. The Phantom Ostrava died the way a carrier dies, deck cycling a last, desperate Phantom launch, and Mercer's riggers, riding their consoles in the towcraft, played the electronic agony of 41 named vessels with such fidelity that human monitoring posts 11 light hours out, fully briefed, logged involuntary distress at the take. The Rain assessed, believed, and spent itself to the last torpedo on the finest fleet of targets ever assembled. It did not spend itself harmlessly. The storm's edges were not edges to those inside them, and the towcraft Kestrel 9, flying the Phantom flagship's death, was caught at the margin of a pack re-attack and killed with all 5 of her crew, the squadron's first combat losses in its history. In the act, her last telemetry showed of holding her charge's performance steady through the strike's final wave so the lie would outlive her. The lie outlived her. At strike's end plus 1 hour, the roads were a graveyard of 41 burning signatures, transmitting the shredded, agonized traffic of a fleet destroyed, and the Malec assessment teams, collating 4,000 terminal reports, certified the First Rain's third campaign opening as its most complete human capital force at Selwyn, annihilated at anchor. Phase 2 of every Rain campaign was the harvest. The Malec battle fleet, magazines light, escorts confident, jumped for the roads to collect a dead fleet. It found one standing in the dust bank on its flank, untouched, at battle stations, having listened to the whole performance on Tightbeam. The Battle of the Barrens Bank was, by the cold accounting of exchange ratios, the most one-sided fleet action of the war, and both Admiralty's analyses agree on the mechanism. The Malec fleet arrived at a graveyard expecting salvage work with its torpedo magazines, the whole grammar of its way of war spent on phantoms, and was engaged at the moment of maximum disbelief by 41 capital ships whose gunnery departments had spent 11 days in cold silence composing their replies. The Malec fought with the courage of professionals and the ammunition of a fleet that had already used its ammunition. Their doctrine, spend munitions, not crews, had no page for the munitions being gone and the crews committed. Their carriers, built to reload the Rain, were caught with racks empty. Their escorts, screening a harvest, met a battle. The human line came out of the dust bank with the road's burning phantom graveyard at its back, so that the Malec fleet fought silhouetted against the evidence of its own deception, and more than one Malec log captured after records the exact moment its officers understood what the burning signatures behind the human guns actually were, and what that meant about everything their campaign had known for 3 weeks. Signal analysis of the battle preserves the human fleet's opening transmission, sent in the clear on Stone's request from the flagship whose phantom had died so convincingly 11 hours before. It was addressed to the Malec commander, and it said, "You are engaging the fleet you destroyed yesterday. Before this proceeds, be advised of your tactical situation. Your magazines are aboard our targets. Regards, Selwyn Rhodes." The engagement lasted 5 hours. 11 Malec capitals struck their colors, the largest haul of the war. The remainder broke for the frontier and were harried out of the marches by a pursuit with full magazines and a sense of theater. The First Rain, the Doctrine that had ended 2 navies, was not merely defeated, it was bankrupted. 4,000 torpedoes of irreplaceable industrial mass converted in 1 hour into the most expensive gunnery exercise in galactic history. And through the battle, at its edge, 11-1 towcraft in signal orange livery held station amid their burning phantoms, conducting the graveyard's final performances, because the deception was maintained, per squadron's standing orders, until the last enemy sensor left the system. Professionals finished the show. The Malec learned what they had shot at from the human fleet's official battle communiqué, which the Admiralty, in a decision debated ever since between the war colleges and the diplomats, published in full, phantom fleet and all, on the reasoning the fleet's chief of staff entered into the record. A doctrine of industrial terror is defeated not when it fails, but when it becomes ridiculous. Publish everything. Let every navy they threaten know the Rain can be sold, a fleet of targets. He was correct. The histories confirm that no Malec First Rain was ever launched again, its planners thereafter unable to certify to their own government that any assembled enemy fleet was real, which was, the human analysts noted with satisfaction, a problem no quantity of torpedoes could solve. The Pigeons came home to Selwyn Rhodes through the wreckage of their own dead phantoms, and the fleet they had impersonated was waiting for them, 41 capital ships manning the rails in full ceremony as 11-1 towcraft passed down the line and every ship rendered. As the squadron passed, the specific honor Stone's crews say meant more than the medals. Each vessel transmitted, on the gunnery range's old exercise frequency, the traditional end-of-shoot signal that the Pigeons had received from them 1,000 times in 20 years of peacetime service. The signal that means the tow line is safe, the exercise is complete, and the shooters are grateful. Cease fire. Targets may retrieve. Well flown. The Kestrel 9's 5 were buried from the flagship, whose phantom self they had died maintaining, and the eulogy was given by the flagship's actual captain, who had listened, in the dustbank's silence, to the whole of the rain falling on his electronic ghost. And his closing line is carved on the squadron memorial at the Selwyn Ranges, beneath 5 names and a towcraft silhouette. They stood where we were supposed to be. There is no older definition of the guard, and no purer one, and until that hour I did not know it could be performed at the range of a whole fleet, by 11 small ships, on behalf of everyone. The inquiries into the Selwyn deception for once were not about failure. They were the fleet's institutions arguing over who got to own the success, and the argument produced, within 2 years, the thing Stone had privately intended from the first pitch, a branch. The decoy service was commissioned with Target Squadron 9 as its founding cadre, its schoolhouse at the Selwyn Ranges, and its charter drafted around the campaign's proven doctrine, which the service's first manual, written substantially by Stone and Mercer, states with the Pigeons' characteristic absence of romance. Deception is not trickery. It is performance under fire, sustained by craft, until the audience has spent what you needed spending. The service's business is to be worth shooting anywhere the fleet requires a fleet to appear to be. Candidates should be advised that the work consists of standing in front of ordnance, that the ordnance is real, and that the service's entire tradition holds that being missed is a discipline, not a mercy. Recruiting, the Admiralty projected, would be difficult. Recruiting ran at 11 applicants per billet from the first cycle, the fleet's culture having absorbed the Barrens Bank into its bloodstream, and the service's crest, chosen by the founding cadre over the Heraldic College's alternatives, settled the tone permanently, a clay pigeon. In signal orange, cracked across its face but whole, above the motto, the fleet had voted informally long before anyone made it official. Missed again. Chief Opal Mercer ran the schoolhouse's rigging faculty for 20 years, and her opening lecture to each class began with a recording. The phantom Vigilance manufactured gunnery arguments, played in full, followed by the real Vigilance formal protest at their insufficiency. And her standing first assignment, before any student touched a ghost rig, was the one she considered the whole trade. You will each choose a real ship of the fleet, and you will study her until you can write 1 minute of her comm traffic that her own crew would accept as genuine. Signatures are physics. Physics is the easy part. The fleet is behavior. Impersonate the arguments first. Avi Stone commanded the decoy service for 11 years, flew the tow line himself, per the logs, well past the age the surgeons preferred, and retired at last at Selwyn Roads, at a ceremony the fleet still talks about because the service planned it, and the service plans theatre professionally. The reviewing formation, drawn up in the roads where the Phantom Fleet had died, was 41 capital ships. The actual veterans of the Barrens Bank, or their successors bearing the names. And as Stone's launch crossed the anchorage, a signal went fleet-wide, and every ship of the line lit its ghost. The decoy service's rigs, now standard fittings, dressing each real vessel for 1 minute in the electronic costume of its own Selwyn Phantom, the fleet impersonating its own impersonation in salute, an honor invented for the occasion, never repeated, and never, the fleet has quietly agreed, to be repeated, because some signatures should stay singular. His retirement address was 8 sentences, and the last 3 are the service's catechism now, printed inside the cover of the manual, recited, by tradition, by every graduating class with their hands on their towcraft's hulls. We were the fleet's targets for 20 years, and we learned the one thing the fleet could not teach itself, what the enemy's weapons believe. Belief can be flown. Stand where your people are supposed to be, fly the belief until it spends itself, and you will bring more of everyone home than any gun ever built. Missed again, colleagues. May it be said of every one of you, at the end of every performance, forever. He is buried at the ranges, per his testament, beside the Kestrel 9 memorial, under a stone that carries no rank and one line, his own choice, filed with the paperwork decades early, in a clerk's joke's final perfected form. Fired upon, without malice, and with, more than anyone in the history of the service. Ordnance expended at subject 2 fleets worth, subject retrieved safe both times, well flown. The Malec, in the long piece that eventually came, contributed the story's strangest chapter, because militaries that have been beaten by deception face a choice between resentment and scholarship, and the Malec, to the lasting respect of their old enemies, chose scholarship. Their staff college's study of the Selwyn campaign ran to 4 volumes and concluded with a finding their own doctrine board, ratified, translated, and framed at the decoy service schoolhouse by the humans, who considered it the finest professional review the branch ever received. The First Rain was not defeated by the human fleet, which it never touched, nor by the Phantom Fleet, which was machinery. It was defeated by a professional culture our doctrine had no category for, personnel whose entire formation consisted of being the objective. We assessed the humans' targets as equipment. They were a priesthood of the receiving end, and they knew our weapons' minds better than our weapons did. Recommendation: doctrines built on expenditure must first ask what the enemy has spent his peacetime being shot at. Some species practice shooting. This one, we now know, also practices standing there. At the armistice exchanges, the Malec delegation asked, as their single ceremonial request, to visit the Selwyn ranges, and were received by the decoy service with full honors and, this being the Pigeons, a demonstration, a ghost rig performance, flown live, of a Malec torpedo carrier. Rendered with such affectionate accuracy, drive wobble, magazine harmonics, the characteristic comm bursts of a Rain reload drill that the delegation's senior officer, an old Rain planner, watched in silence and then asked, per the visit's official record, only one question. "How long," he asked, "did your people study us, to fly us that truly?" The duty rigger, a graduate of Mercer's faculty, gave the answer that closes the Malec Staff College's 4th volume and the Decoy Services Manual, and, as well as anything ever has, the whole account of the fleet that was worth shooting. "All our lives, sir," she said. "It is the whole of the trade. You cannot stand where someone is supposed to be until you have taken the trouble to know them. That is true of targets, and of enemies, and, our founder used to say, of everything else worth doing in the dark. Would you like to see how you look to your torpedoes? We kept the recordings. We keep everything. We are, professionally speaking, very hard to get rid of. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.